Royal Guard mocked at the shooting range, unaware he's a previous SAS sniper. James Thornton walked through the large gates of the Royal Guard barracks with his usual calm stride. The crisp morning air smelled faintly of wet grass and iron from the nearby stables, carrying the sound of distant commands being shouted and boots clattering on cobblestones. Everything about James looked ordinary at first glance. His dark uniform was spotless, his posture straight, and his polished boots reflected the sunlight. But there was something in the way he moved, in the quiet precision of each step, that seemed to suggest a life lived with discipline far beyond the normal training of a Royal Guard. Most of the younger recruits didn't notice it. They saw only a man who seemed quiet, perhaps even boring, standing silently in the corner of the parade ground. James rarely spoke unless necessary. His words were measured, never rushed, and he had a habit of observing people rather than immediately joining conversations. In a place where many recruits felt the need to show off their strength, their speed, or their familiarity with weapons, James seemed to move at a different pace, one almost deliberately slow and careful. He carried himself like a man used to thinking 10 steps ahead, though no one knew what he was thinking. Rumors floated among the recruits about him. Some said he had been in the military before joining the Royal Guard. Others speculated that he had some kind of secret training, though no one dared to ask. James never confirmed or denied anything. He just smiled faintly when someone attempted to tease him, letting the curiosity linger without ever giving an answer. This morning, the barracks were unusually busy. The annual shooting exercise was set to take place, and every guard, new and experienced, was preparing their rifles, cleaning them carefully, and adjusting their stances. The shooting range was a sprawling area just outside the main compound, with rows of targets set at various distances. The sun had risen high enough to shine clearly on the targets, but a gentle breeze made the flags attached to each target sway slightly. The atmosphere was a mixture of anticipation, competition, and nervous energy. James joined the group at the far end of the line. His rifle was plain, unadorned, but immaculately maintained. While the others fussed with fancy scopes or talked loudly about their previous scores, James quietly inspected his weapon. His hands moved with a familiarity that made even the most experienced trainers glance in his direction, though no one could quite place why the movements looked so deliberate. He adjusted the stock, checked the sights, and ran a finger lightly along the barrel, as if greeting an old friend. The other guards, mostly younger recruits, had already started whispering. A few snickered behind their hands when they noticed James taking so much time. "Who takes this long just to check their rifle?" one muttered under his breath. Another laughed, "Bet he's never hit a target in his life." A third added, "Looks like Grandpa is ready for his first day at school." James heard none of it. He had learned long ago that people often underestimated others, and he had learned, even longer ago, that their underestimation could be useful. He took a deep breath and focused on the targets. The noises of chatter and laughter faded into the background as he centered himself, feeling the rifle steady in his hands. Every detail, the weight of the weapon, the slight shift in the breeze, the distance to the target, was noted in his mind, even if it was only a fraction of a second. The trainers began walking down the line, checking equipment and reminding the recruits about safety procedures. James's rifle was already in perfect order, so he simply nodded politely as one of the trainers gave him a brief, approving glance. He had been through inspections like this countless times in his past life, though no one at the barracks could know that. James didn't seek recognition. He didn't need it. All that mattered was that he was ready. As the other recruits began lining up for practice shots, the teasing didn't stop. One of the braver young men, standing just a few feet away, decided to speak directly to James. "Hey, old man," he said, grinning, "don't strain yourself trying to hit the target. Maybe we should give you a smaller one, like a coin." A ripple of laughter followed, and a few others joined in, pointing at James's careful stance and slow preparation. James looked up, meeting the boys' gaze. He didn't say a word. He only tilted his head slightly and smiled faintly, a smile that didn't mock or scold but seemed to carry a quiet, unspoken confidence. The boy's smile faltered slightly, but he shrugged and laughed nervously, assuming James would just be another easy target for ridicule. The first shots rang out. Bullets whizzed through the air, striking targets with varying degrees of accuracy. Some hit the bullseye, some missed entirely. The younger recruits cheered or groaned depending on their performance, their energy loud and chaotic. James waited patiently. He adjusted his stance, took a deep, measured breath, and exhaled slowly. When he finally pulled the trigger, the shot was perfect. The bullet struck the center of the target with a sharp, clean impact. A few heads turned. Whispers began to spread. "Did you see that?" one recruit muttered. He hit the middle without even aiming for that long. But James didn't react to the murmurs. He continued with the next shot, then the next. Each bullet hit precisely where he intended. Each movement he made seemed effortless, even graceful. To anyone watching casually, it looked as though he had been born for this. The young recruits who had been mocking him earlier grew uneasy. Some tried to laugh it off, pretending that it was just a lucky shot. Others glanced at each other, confusion mixing with growing respect. James never celebrated or showed off. He simply reloaded, adjusted, and shot again. It was as if he were teaching without speaking, showing them the power of focus, patience, and skill. The trainers noticed as well. They whispered among themselves, clearly impressed by James's calm efficiency and the precision of his shots. One trainer in particular stopped mid-inspection, leaning slightly to get a better look. There was something familiar about James's technique, something that reminded him of elite marksmen he had encountered in the past. But he said nothing, keeping his observation private. By the time the morning practice ended, a noticeable change had occurred. The mocking whispers had stopped. Where there had been laughter, there was now quiet curiosity. The younger guards watched James with a mix of awe and caution, realizing that the man they had tried to ridicule was no ordinary recruit. He had carried himself through the teasing with calm patience and had demonstrated skill far beyond what anyone had expected. James gathered his equipment silently and prepared to leave the range. He didn't seek attention or acknowledgement. The quiet dignity with which he carried himself seemed to fill the space around him, leaving a lasting impression on those who had observed him. As he walked back toward the barracks, the breeze gently brushing against his uniform, there was a sense among the recruits that they had witnessed something remarkable, even if they didn't yet understand the full story. For James, it was just another day. But for those who had mocked him, it was a lesson in humility and the danger of making assumptions based on appearances. The Royal Guard Barracks, a place where discipline and honor were expected, had quietly revealed one of its greatest hidden stories. And James Thornton, calm and unassuming, walked among them with the knowledge that skill, experience, and patience often speak louder than words or laughter. By the time the sun had climbed higher in the sky, James had already returned to the routine of the day, inspecting equipment, assisting a few recruits with minor adjustments, and silently observing the training exercises around him. No one could have guessed that this quiet, seemingly ordinary man had faced life-and-death situations in faraway lands, had been trained in one of the most elite military units in the world, and had survived where others would have failed. His past remained hidden, known only to himself and perhaps a few trusted trainers who had recognized the marks of experience in his stance and technique. The morning sun climbed higher, casting a warm glow over the shooting range. The breeze was steady, but it could not blow away the tension that had begun to build among the younger recruits. The earlier display of James Thornton's skill had left them uneasy. What had seemed like a slow, cautious man at first now appeared to be someone entirely out of their league, and yet they still couldn't shake their curiosity or their desire to challenge him. Some of the bolder recruits began whispering among themselves. "Do you think he's really that good, or was it just luck?" one asked. Another shook his head. "Luck. Look at how he handles that rifle. I've never seen anyone so precise. And the way he breathes, it's like he's not even nervous at all." The first boy smirked, trying to mask his growing respect with bravado. "Well, everyone can have one good shot. Let's see if he can keep it up." James, as always, paid them no attention. He was standing at the edge of the range, adjusting the sight on his rifle with careful, practiced movements. Each adjustment was subtle but deliberate. Every motion seemed to have a purpose. The younger guards noticed the methodical way he handled the weapon, but they still assumed they could challenge him, still believed they could get a reaction out of him. The trainers called the group together for the next stage of the exercise, a timed shooting challenge. Targets would pop up at random distances, and each guard would have only a few seconds to hit them. This test was designed to measure accuracy under pressure, reflexes, and focus. The younger recruits, full of energy and overconfidence, were eager to show off. They lined up quickly, rifles in hand, glancing at each other with competitive grins. James joined them quietly at the end of the line. He didn't rush, didn't fidget, and didn't speak. To an outsider, it might have looked as though he were not interested, but in truth, he was observing everything around him. He noted the wind direction, the subtle shadows cast by the moving targets, and the nervous twitches in the hands of the other recruits. Every detail mattered. Every detail could give him an edge. The first round began and chaos erupted. Young guards fired quickly, eager to hit as many targets as possible. Some missed completely. Others hit the targets but with scattered shots. A few, the truly skilled ones, managed to hit most of the targets, and a cheer went up from those watching. Then it was James's turn. He raised his rifle smoothly, his movements almost fluid, as if the weapon were an extension of his own body. He didn't rush. He didn't panic. Each target appeared, and each shot found its mark with astonishing precision. The bullet struck exactly where he aimed, even at targets that seemed almost impossible to reach for the hurried shooters around him. The younger recruits who had been watching confidently suddenly grew silent. Their smiles faded, replaced by a mixture of surprise and unease. How is he doing that?" one whispered. Another muttered, "He's like too calm." "It doesn't make sense." They looked at each other nervously, suddenly aware that their assumptions about James were entirely wrong. Some of the braver ones, still unwilling to admit defeat, tried to make jokes to cover their discomfort. "Hey, don't tell me he's got magic bullets in that thing," one said, but his laughter sounded forced. A few others snickered nervously, glancing at James, but even their teasing felt hollow. James didn't react. His eyes remained steady, his focus absolute, and his expression calm. As the exercise continued, it became clear that James was not just good, he was exceptional. The targets that had caused other recruits difficulty fell effortlessly under his aim. The trainers who had been watching from the side exchanged quiet glances. One of them muttered under his breath, "I've seen a few excellent shooters, but this is something else." Another nodded. "There's no hesitation in his technique. He's seen this before. He's trained like this for years." The realization began to sink in among the recruits. The boy who had mocked James earlier, joking about giving him a smaller target, suddenly felt a sting of embarrassment. He had expected a slow, unremarkable performance, but instead, James had outperformed almost everyone in the group with ease. He looked at James again, this time seeing the quiet confidence, the unwavering focus, and the skill in every movement. It was clear that this was not a man to be underestimated. By the halfway point, the atmosphere at the range had shifted. The earlier laughter and teasing were gone, replaced by quiet attention and respect, tinged with fear. The younger guards watched James with a mixture of awe and disbelief, realizing that he was a different kind of competitor, someone whose past experiences had shaped him in ways they could not even imagine. One of the recruits finally spoke, his voice low and hesitant. What did he do before he came here? He's too precise, too perfect." No one answered. Even the trainers who recognized the signs of elite training remained silent, letting the performance speak for itself. James continued shooting calmly without a single wasted movement. Each time a target appeared, he assessed its distance and angle, adjusted his breathing and fired. His shots were consistent, accurate, and deadly precise. The other recruits, watching in disbelief, could only try to keep up, but none could match his calm efficiency. The timer ended, and James lowered his rifle without a word. His score was posted, and a collective gasp went through the group. He had hit every target with near-perfect accuracy, scoring far higher than anyone else. The younger recruits who had once mocked him could not hide their shock. Their embarrassment was palpable. They had assumed he was slow and inexperienced, but instead, he had proven himself beyond their wildest expectations. A few of the braver recruits tried to joke again, attempting to ease their discomfort. "Okay, maybe you're not so bad, old man," one said, his voice shaking slightly. James smiled faintly but said nothing. The smile was not mocking. It was simply calm and unassuming, carrying the quiet strength of a man who had long since learned that skill speaks louder than words. The trainers called the group together for a debrief. They praised the recruits for their effort but could not ignore James's extraordinary performance. One trainer, speaking quietly, remarked on his precise technique and steady hand. He noted how James's movements suggested years of experience, discipline, and training far beyond the ordinary. The younger recruits listened, still struggling to reconcile the quiet, unassuming man they had mocked with the exceptional skill he had just demonstrated. James, as always, said nothing about himself. He didn't boast. He didn't explain. To him, the performance was simply part of his duty, part of the training, and part of the life he had chosen as a royal guard. But the lesson for the others was clear. Appearances could be deceiving. Quiet, unassuming people might carry skills and experiences that others could not even imagine. By the end of the morning, the mood had shifted completely. The earlier teasing and mocking were gone, replaced by respect and cautious curiosity. The younger recruits watched James with a mixture of admiration and apprehension, realizing that they had misjudged him entirely. They had assumed he was slow, inexperienced, and perhaps even foolish, but the truth was far different. James gathered his rifle and prepared to leave the range, just as he had done before. He moved with the same calm efficiency, every step measured and deliberate. The breeze carried the faint sound of whispered conversations behind him, as the recruits discussed the man who had outperformed everyone with ease. They could not stop talking about him, trying to understand who he was and how he had become so skilled. For James, it was just another day. He had done his duty, demonstrated his skill, and reminded those around him that patience, focus, and experience are far more valuable than speed, noise, or bravado. He walked back toward the barracks with his usual quiet confidence, leaving behind a group of younger recruits forever changed by the morning's events. By the time he reached the barracks, the sun was high in the sky, casting long shadows across the parade ground. The younger recruits lingered near the edge of the range, still talking in hushed tones about the man who had humbled them all. Some were inspired, some were embarrassed. But all were aware of one undeniable truth. James Thornton was no ordinary Royal Guard. After the morning exercises, the Royal Guard recruits were given a short break. The younger guards wandered around, talking quietly in small groups. Most of them were still trying to process what had happened at the shooting range. Some tried to laugh it off, but the nervousness in their voices betrayed their unease. They had mocked James Thornton earlier, confident that he was slow, inexperienced, or just overly cautious? Now they realized they had been completely wrong. Even the trainers were impressed. James had completed every target with near-perfect accuracy, maintaining calm under pressure while everyone else scrambled. There was no hesitation in his movements, no sign of nervousness, and no wasted motion. The younger recruits could only watch in silence, trying to understand how a man they had underestimated so easily could outperform them all so effortlessly. One of the recruits, a tall, confident young man named Daniel, finally spoke up. "Okay," he said, shaking his head. "I admit it. I thought you were, I don't know, slow. But what you did, it was incredible." He paused, glancing nervously at James, who was quietly cleaning his rifle in the corner. How did you? I mean, have you done this before?" James looked up at him, calm as ever, and simply smiled faintly. "I've had some practice," he said softly, almost as if the words were unimportant. He did not boast. He did not try to impress anyone. His tone was simple, quiet, and polite. That tiny smile, coupled with the confidence in his eyes, made Daniel stop mid-sentence. There was something in James's demeanor that hinted at experience far beyond what words could explain. The other recruits had gathered around, curiosity mixing with a bit of fear. "What kind of practice?" another asked hesitantly. James did not answer. He only continued cleaning his rifle, moving with the same calm precision as before. The silence spoke volumes. Everyone could sense that this was a man who had seen and done things that they could not even imagine. A senior trainer, observing the conversation, stepped forward. His voice was calm but firm. "James, would you demonstrate the next exercise for the group?" he asked. There was no doubt in the trainer's voice that James would excel, and his request carried a quiet authority. James nodded and set his rifle aside for a moment. He began to explain the exercise, his words clear and precise, easy for anyone to understand. But the younger recruits, instead of focusing on the instructions, couldn't help but notice the subtle ways James moved. Every gesture was controlled. Every movement was smooth and deliberate. Even when he leaned to point something out, his posture never wavered. There was a discipline in him that suggested training at a level far beyond basic guard duties. The next round of shooting exercises began. This time, the targets were set at varying distances, some much farther than before. The other recruits struggled to hit them, the farther targets causing anxiety and tension. They fired quickly, hoping to make up for their lack of accuracy with speed. Most missed entirely, while a few hit the edges of the targets. A few shouted in frustration, smacking the side of their rifles or throwing up their hands in disbelief. James, as always, moved slowly and methodically. He assessed each target, gauging the distance and wind with subtle shifts of his body. His breathing was controlled, steady, and deep. When he fired, each bullet struck exactly where he intended, often hitting targets that seemed impossible to reach for the other recruits. With every shot, whispers and stares grew louder. Some of the recruits leaned closer to one another, whispering, How is he doing this?" Or, "It's like he can see into the future." Daniel, still struggling to process everything, shook his head again. "I don't get it," he muttered under his breath. "He doesn't rush. He doesn't panic. He just hits every target perfectly." His eyes followed James with a mixture of fascination and unease. The trainers were watching closely now, exchanging meaningful glances. One of them, a man named Sergeant Harris, stepped forward and called a pause in the exercise. "Everyone stop for a moment," he said firmly. "James, come here." James approached, his steps calm and steady. The younger recruits watched silently, knowing that something significant was about to happen. Sergeant Harris spoke quietly but clearly. "I want everyone to pay attention to the technique James is using. Notice how he positions himself, how he controls his breathing, and how he maintains focus. What you're seeing isn't luck or beginner's skill. This is training and experience at a level that far exceeds ordinary practice." A hush fell over the group. The words hung in the air. James's skill was no longer something they could ignore. The earlier teasing, the jokes, and the laughter were completely replaced by attention, curiosity, and a touch of fear. The recruits realized that the man they had mocked earlier was not just talented. He had been trained to excel under extreme conditions. James nodded slightly to the group and demonstrated a slow, methodical stance. He explained his reasoning for each movement, each adjustment. But the way he moved suggested a history of precision and control that could not be taught in ordinary guard training. Even as he spoke, it was clear that his skill was instinctive, almost effortless. The younger recruits tried to follow his instructions, but it became quickly obvious that replicating his calm, precise movements was nearly impossible for them. They struggled to hit the targets, their bullets scattering while James continued to perform with ease. Some of the recruits, growing frustrated, began to realize that no matter how hard they tried, they could not match his skill. By the end of the exercise, James had completed the targets with near-perfect accuracy once again. The group was silent, a mix of awe and respect filling the air. Daniel, the one who had mocked him most, approached cautiously. "James," he said quietly, I didn't realize, how did you get like this?" James looked at him with calm eyes and replied simply, "Experience. Focus, patience." There was no arrogance in his tone, no bragging, just a quiet acknowledgement that skill comes from practice, discipline, and training. But Sergeant Harris, who had been watching closely, saw something more. There was a subtle recognition in the way James handled his rifle, the way he moved, the precision of his shots. "He's not just experienced," Harris said under his breath to another trainer. "This technique, I've only seen it in elite military snipers. He's trained at a level few people ever reach." The younger recruits, still trying to understand, began asking questions. "You mean like special forces?" one whispered. Another nodded slowly, the realization settling in. "That's why he's so calm. That's why he's perfect under pressure. He's like a professional soldier." James, overhearing the whispers, smiled faintly but said nothing. There was no need. His performance spoke louder than any words ever could. The younger guards were learning a lesson in humility, respect, and the hidden depths of those who seem quiet and unassuming. Later, as the morning turned into afternoon, James walked back to the barracks alone, rifle carefully carried at his side. The breeze was warmer now, the sunlight reflecting off the polished cobblestones. Behind him, the younger recruits continued to whisper, still amazed by what they had witnessed. Some were inspired, some were embarrassed by their earlier behavior. All were aware that James Thornton was no ordinary Royal Guard. The senior trainers gathered quietly, discussing what they had seen. Sergeant Harris nodded thoughtfully. "We need to make sure the recruits understand what they've witnessed today," he said. "James is a model of discipline and focus. If they pay attention, they can learn more from observation than from their own mistakes." Even as the day continued, James remained calm and composed, moving through the routine of the barracks as though nothing unusual had happened. He offered quiet guidance to a few recruits, adjusted his uniform, and maintained his presence without fanfare. Yet everyone around him felt the unspoken truth. This man had a history, a depth, and a skill set that few could match. By the evening, the story of James Thornton's extraordinary performance had spread through the barracks. The younger recruits were no longer mocking him. Instead, they spoke in hushed tones, sharing what they had seen, trying to make sense of the man who had humbled them all. Some approached him quietly, asking for advice. Others simply watched him with a mixture of respect and awe. James, as always, remained unassuming. He did not seek recognition or praise. For him, skill was not about showing off. It was about focus, duty, and doing the job right. But for those who had witnessed it, the lesson was unforgettable. Appearances could be deceiving, and sometimes the quietest person in the room carried the greatest strength. The next morning, the atmosphere at the Royal Guard barracks was noticeably different. The younger recruits moved with quiet caution, glancing frequently at James Thornton. Overnight, word of his performance at the shooting range had spread like wildfire. Where there had once been joking and mockery, there was now a quiet curiosity mixed with respect. Some still tried to joke, but their voices sounded weaker, less confident. It was clear they no longer saw him as someone to tease. James, as always, remained calm and composed. He carried himself with the same quiet discipline as the day before. His uniform was pristine, his boots polished to a high shine, and his movements smooth and precise. To anyone observing, he seemed ordinary until he began his duties. Every action was deliberate, every step measured. Those who had witnessed him at the range could now recognize the subtle marks of a man trained far beyond ordinary standards. Sergeant Harris called the recruits together for a special exercise that would test teamwork, strategy, and marksmanship. He wanted to emphasize learning through observation as well as practice. The recruits lined up, each one nervous and eager to prove themselves after the previous day's display of James's skill. The targets would be more difficult this time, placed at greater distances and with more challenging angles. The trainer's voice carried a quiet authority. Today, pay close attention to your movements, your aim, and your timing. Watch those around you who excel and learn from them. All eyes naturally fell on James. He moved to the front, assembling his rifle with calm precision. Even the most experienced recruits felt a strange tension in the air. Something about James's movements suggested he was preparing for more than just a training exercise. There was a weight to the way he handled his weapon, an almost silent command over it. It was subtle, but noticeable. The exercise began. Targets appeared and disappeared at irregular intervals, forcing the recruits to react quickly. The younger guards struggled, firing too fast or too slow, missing the marks entirely. Their frustration grew. Whispers of "I can't keep up" and "How does he do it?" drifted through the air. James, however, remained calm. He assessed each target before raising his rifle, taking careful aim and firing. Each shot landed exactly where he intended, even under pressure. Daniel, the recruit who had mocked James most openly, watched in disbelief. "There's no way a person can be that perfect," he muttered under his breath. "It's like he knows where the target will be before it even appears." Around him, others nodded, their own attempts at speed and skill proving inadequate. The trainers observed silently, exchanging knowing glances. Sergeant Harris leaned close to another instructor and whispered, "He's more than just disciplined. That stance, the breathing, the calm under pressure, I've only seen this in elite snipers. SAS-level training." The other trainer's eyes widened. "You think he really?" Harris nodded subtly. "Yes, that's exactly it. He's trained in ways these recruits can't even imagine, and he's still as calm as if this were a simple walk in the park." James finished the exercise without a single mistake. The targets that had challenged every other recruit fell effortlessly under his aim. His precision, calmness, and focus were unmatched. The younger guards could not deny it any longer. This was not luck. This was not natural talent alone. This was the result of years of elite training and experience. After the exercise, the recruits gathered around James, eager but hesitant. Daniel stepped forward, his confidence shaken by what he had seen. "James, what kind of training is that? You're not just a royal guard, are you?" He hesitated, unsure how to phrase the question. James looked at him calmly, his eyes steady and unflinching. "I've had experience before joining this unit," he said quietly. He did not elaborate, but the seriousness in his voice caught everyone's attention. His words were brief, but they carried weight. The younger recruits exchanged nervous glances, sensing that he had lived through things far beyond their understanding. Sergeant Harris, noticing the shift in attention, stepped forward. "James has trained at an elite level before joining the Royal Guard. He served in missions where precision, patience, and skill could mean life or death. That is why he handles these exercises the way he does. The words settled over the recruits like a heavy curtain. Their respect grew instantly, mixed with a quiet awe. James Thornton was no ordinary guard. He had faced situations that none of them could even imagine. He had been trained to act under the highest pressure, to remain calm when mistakes could be fatal. And now, standing before them quietly, he had brought a glimpse of that skill into their world. One of the recruits, a younger man named Michael, finally spoke up, his voice trembling slightly. "So, you were like a soldier, not just here for the ceremony?" James nodded slightly. "Yes," he said simply. "I was trained in an elite unit. I've had experience in operations where patience, focus, and precision mattered more than anything else. But that is in the past. Now my duty is here." The explanation was enough. The recruits absorbed it silently, realizing the enormity of what they had underestimated. Those who had mocked him were now ashamed, understanding that their assumptions had been naive. They had believed James was ordinary, perhaps even weak, but he had demonstrated calmness, skill, and control that only come from extraordinary experience. Over the next few hours, the training exercises continued. James moved through them with quiet efficiency, helping those around him improve their technique without showing off. He adjusted a recruit's stance here, gave subtle advice on breathing there, and moved silently through the group, always calm, always precise. The younger guards watched him with a mixture of admiration and disbelief. Every time he fired his rifle, every time he made a small adjustment to his stance, it was clear that his skill was rooted in far more than simple practice. It was instinctive. His movements were fluid, precise, and flawless. Some of the recruits began to mimic him quietly, trying to learn from observation. Others simply watched, too awed to speak. By the afternoon, the story of James's background had spread through the barracks. Whispers of SAS sniper and elite training floated through the hallways. Some recruits were nervous, others inspired. A few approached James quietly, asking for tips, and he offered guidance with patience, never condescending, never boasting. Daniel approached him again, hesitant but respectful. I'm sorry for mocking you before," he said quietly. "I had no idea. I didn't understand." James nodded slightly, his expression calm. "It's all right, mistakes happen. What matters is learning from them." The simplicity of his response, combined with the authority in his presence, left Daniel momentarily speechless. He realized that this was a man who had seen far more than he could imagine, and had survived by remaining disciplined, humble, and focused. Even the trainers, who had recognized the signs of elite training early on, were impressed by James's humility. He had demonstrated extraordinary skill without boasting, without seeking attention. His actions alone had commanded respect. That day, the younger recruits learned a lesson that would stay with them for the rest of their careers. Humility, skill, and experience often speak louder than words, and those who appear quiet and unassuming may carry hidden depths beyond imagination. By the evening, the Royal Guard barracks were quiet, the sun setting over the horizon. The recruits were tired, their bodies sore from the exercises, but their minds were buzzing with what they had witnessed. James moved calmly through the barracks, carrying his rifle with the same disciplined ease he had displayed all day. There was no fanfare, no attention-seeking, no need. The respect and admiration he had earned came naturally, silently, through his actions alone. Daniel and a few other recruits lingered near the edge of the training ground, watching him. "He's different," Daniel said quietly. "Not just because of skill, but because of how he carries himself. He's unshakable," Michael nodded. "I think that's what I'm most amazed by. He's not trying to show off. He just is, and somehow that makes him even more impressive." As the recruits began heading to their rooms for the evening, James paused for a moment, looking out over the barracks. The wind rustled gently through the trees, and the last rays of sunlight reflected off the polished weapons and uniforms. For James, it was another day of duty. For those who had witnessed him, it was a day that would change how they viewed skill, discipline, and respect forever. The quiet strength of James Thornton, once mocked and underestimated, had been revealed. His past, his elite training, and his calm, unshakable presence left an impression that no amount of teasing or arrogance could erase. And for the younger recruits, the lesson was clear. Never judge a person by what you see on the surface. Sometimes, the quietest person in the room carries the greatest power and the deepest experience. The next morning, the Royal Guard barracks were alive with quiet anticipation. The events of the previous days had changed everything. Recruits moved with more caution, paying attention to every detail of their training. Whispers of James Thornton's extraordinary skill and past training spread among the younger guards, and a new sense of respect filled the air. Even those who had once mocked him approached their duties differently now. They watched him from a distance, trying to understand his calm efficiency. Some tried to mimic his stance and breathing. Others simply observed, taking mental notes on how he moved, how he held his rifle, and how he reacted to each new challenge. James, however, went about his morning routine with the same quiet discipline as ever. The day's exercises were different. Sergeant Harris had prepared a series of scenarios designed to test teamwork, leadership, and precision under pressure. Some involved moving targets, others required split-second decisions. The goal was to push the recruits beyond their comfort zones, to see how well they could work together under stress. For the younger guards, this was both exciting and intimidating, knowing that James would be part of the exercise. James approached the first scenario calmly, surveying the targets and the terrain. The other recruits fumbled nervously as they prepared, glancing at him for guidance. Even without speaking, his presence had a grounding effect. The younger guards began to follow his example instinctively. They adjusted their posture, controlled their breathing, and focused more carefully, as if they were all aware that they were learning from the best. The first round began. Targets popped up unexpectedly, requiring quick reactions. Many recruits hesitated, fired too quickly, or misjudged the distance. Their frustration was obvious and a few whispered complaints. James, however, moved with calm efficiency. Every step was measured, every shot deliberate. He communicated with small gestures, signaling when to move or when to wait, guiding the group subtly without overtly instructing them. Daniel, who had been the most vocal in mocking James days earlier, found himself paying close attention. He noticed how James maintained focus even under pressure, how his breathing never faltered, and how he always seemed to anticipate the movement of the targets. "It's incredible," Daniel muttered under his breath. "He doesn't just aim, he understands everything before it happens." As the exercise progressed, the recruits began to adjust. The lessons from watching James were sinking in. They moved more carefully, communicated silently, and waited for the right moments to act. Even the recruits who had been the most overconfident realized that they could learn more from observation and patience than from rushing forward recklessly. By the end of the first scenario, the group had improved dramatically. They hit more targets, worked more efficiently as a team, and displayed a new sense of composure. Sergeant Harris, watching from the sidelines, nodded in approval. "That's exactly the point," he said quietly. "Observe, learn, focus. James has shown you that skill isn't just about speed or strength. It's about control and precision under pressure." James walked calmly to the center of the group, setting his rifle down and observing the recruits. He did not boast or comment. He simply stood there, calm and composed, letting the results of the exercise speak for themselves. The younger recruits felt a mixture of admiration and humility. They had learned something far more valuable than hitting targets. They had learned the importance of patience, focus, and disciplined observation. Next came a more challenging scenario. This one involved multiple moving targets at varying distances, combined with obstacles that required careful navigation. The recruits were nervous. Many had already realized that they could not match James's skill, but they wanted to perform well for themselves and for the group. James moved first, surveying the terrain carefully. He calculated distances, wind direction, and the best positions for cover. His movements were fluid and efficient. The other recruits followed his lead, trying to emulate his calm approach. It was clear that his influence had transformed the group. Even those who had been skeptical were now working together with purpose, paying attention to details they had previously ignored. As the scenario unfolded, James continued to perform flawlessly. He hit targets with precision, guided the recruits subtly through gestures, and moved efficiently between positions. Each time a recruit hesitated, James's calm example encouraged them to focus, to breathe, and to take careful, deliberate action. By the end of the exercise, the entire group had improved dramatically. The younger guards were exhausted but proud of their progress, and they knew that much of their improvement came from observing James's example. After the exercises, the recruits gathered for a debrief. Sergeant Harris addressed the group. "Today, you learned more than just marksmanship. You learned teamwork, focus, and the value of calm under pressure. You also learned that leadership can be quiet and skill can be demonstrated without words. James has shown you that excellence comes from discipline and experience, not from rushing or showing off." The younger recruits nodded, still in awe. Daniel stepped forward, speaking for many of them. "Sir, we didn't understand at first. We thought James was slow or inexperienced, but now we see he's extraordinary, not just in skill but in how he guides us without even trying. We've learned more from him than from anything else we've done here." James simply nodded, his expression calm and unassuming. "Thank you," he said quietly. "But remember, the goal isn't to imitate me. The goal is to learn discipline, patience, and focus. Everyone has the ability to improve if they pay attention and work carefully. Skills come from practice, observation, and understanding, not from rushing or showing off." Over the following days, James continued to mentor the recruits, quietly but effectively. He offered guidance on posture, aim, breathing, and observation. He emphasized patience, teaching them that the smallest adjustments could make a significant difference. The younger guards learned quickly, inspired by his calm authority and precise actions. Gradually, the barracks transformed. Where there had once been loud competition, mocking, and impatience, there was now focus, cooperation, and respect. The younger recruits sought James's advice, valued his guidance, and learned to work as a team. Even those who had been skeptical or arrogant began to see the importance of humility and observation. By the end of the week, James had become more than just a royal guard to the recruits. He had become a mentor, a silent teacher whose actions spoke louder than words. The lessons he imparted were not just about marksmanship or tactics, but about discipline, patience, and the power of calm focus. On the final day of the week, the barracks held a small ceremony to recognize the progress of the recruits. James was called forward by Sergeant Harris, who spoke to the group. "James Thornton has demonstrated extraordinary skill, discipline, and leadership. His calm example has taught us all the value of focus, observation, and patience. Today, we honor his dedication and the lessons he has imparted to all of us." The younger recruits applauded, their admiration genuine. Some felt a twinge of embarrassment for their earlier mockery, but they also felt gratitude. James's skill, humility, and quiet guidance had transformed their understanding of excellence. James accepted the recognition with his usual calm demeanor, nodding politely. He did not speak at length. His actions, his presence, and his teaching had already said everything that needed to be said. The younger recruits understood, without a word, the depth of his experience, and the value of the lessons they had learned from him. As the ceremony concluded, James walked back through the barracks, rifle carefully carried at his side, his uniform immaculate, and his steps calm and measured. The recruits watched him silently, knowing that they had been part of something special. They had witnessed skill, patience, and discipline at a level far beyond what they had imagined. That evening, as the sun set over the barracks, the younger recruits gathered quietly among themselves. "I can't believe we ever mocked him," Daniel said softly. "He's amazing. And he doesn't even brag about it. He just shows us the right way to do things." Michael nodded. "I've learned more this week than I have in months of training, and it's all because of him. James isn't just skilled, he's patient, careful, and inspiring. I hope I can be like that someday." James, walking through the courtyard, overheard the whispers but said nothing. He didn't need to. His presence, his calm confidence, and the lessons he had imparted had already left a permanent mark. The younger recruits would remember this week for the rest of their careers, carrying with them the principles of focus, discipline, humility, and the quiet strength that comes from experience. By the time night fell, the barracks were silent, the day's lessons settling into memory. James Thornton stood quietly, surveying the training ground, his posture calm and disciplined. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the courtyard. For James, it had been another week of duty, but for the recruits, it had been a week that changed their understanding of skill, leadership, and respect forever. They had learned a powerful lesson. Appearances can be deceiving. Skill and experience are often hidden beneath quiet calm, and the greatest teachers are sometimes the ones who speak the least. James Thornton, once mocked, had earned their deepest respect, not through words or boasting, but through action, patience, and unwavering discipline. And in doing so, he had left a lasting mark on the next generation of Royal Guards.